The 2025 Washington Commanders have been a statistical paradox, highly effective between the 20s before self-destructing in the winning time moments that we know head coach Dan Quinn worked so hard to prepare his team for. All of that and more right now on Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network in the world, thanks to people just like you. I'm David Harrison, your guy on the ground covering the Washington Commanders for WUSA 9, also writing about the team for Commanders on SI, and you can follow me on X at dharrison82. You can follow me on Instagram at dharrison_82, trying to get better at those two specific social media platforms. Coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, individual brilliance from the team's veterans and some emerging youthful players are being wasted. The bend don't break philosophy has been all but shattered this season. But first, we got to talk about the paradox that is the Washington Commanders offense in 2025. All of that is coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And it's all brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. As we push deeper into the bye week, I thought this would be a good opportunity to kind of look back a little bit at the season so far, what it really has been in a totality type of viewpoint, and kind of in some of the areas where it's differed from 2024. Obviously, the results are differing greatly from 2024, but really in 2025, the Washington Commanders have become a statistical paradox. It's very confusing. They're an offensive juggernaut in the open field statistically and ranking-wise, but then they consistently self-destruct in those high leverage areas that ultimately decide wins and losses. And of course, the defense is coming up as well. We've got to talk plenty about that. But let's talk about the false positive that kind of is this offense and the elite production that you get between the 20s, which kind of points to that undeniable talent, right? The rushing attack is been elite this year. It's ranked fourth, coming into Sunday night, Monday night games, or coming into the week, I should say, Thursday night games. The Washington Commanders rushing attack, top 5 in the NFL, I think top 6 in yards per carry, but top 5 overall. And listen, we've talked about this several times over the course of the last few weeks, how the rushing attack started off really, really well, and then either by lack of execution in some areas or lack of usage in some other areas has just been kind of steadily declining. But look, when your rushing offense is steadily declining and is still sitting in the top 10 as we get to the end of November, the bottom line is this rushing attack has been very, very effective. And unlike last year, you can't even just point to Jaden Daniels and say, well, Jaden Daniels is the reason it's been effective, because Jaden Daniels hasn't even been on the field for a lot of this time. So right now, the Washington Commanders rushing attack, and certainly Marcus Mariota contributes right as well. I don't want to take away from that. But right now, averaging almost 140 yards per game, they're physically dominating in the middle 80, right? So you take off your own 10-yard line back to the end zone, the opponent's 10-yard line into the end zone. You have your middle 80 yards of the field. They produced 379 net yards in week 11 alone. And that data just kind of really proves that this team's identity is what it's basically been since the start of the season. We talked about is a run-first offense. Running to the right tackle has been the area that this Washington Commanders offense has been most effective, averaging over 8 yards per carry off right tackle. Right end, they're averaging 6.41 yards per carry. So just running to the offense's right side behind Josh Connerly Jr., Sam Cosmi. There was some other guards in there in the mix as well. Obviously, with guys pulling like Chris Paul, the left guard, Tyler Biadasz from time to time. It's been a schematic success, and the offensive line dominance on that side was not present at this point in the NFL season last year. So that's actually gotten better. From a tempo standpoint, they've been running no huddle. That's not a surprise. We saw that last year as well. They're leading the league in no huddle rate right now. 67% of their offense is being run out of no huddle, which helps create that rhythm in that open field area, but that often vanishes when the field compresses because you're just a little bit more deliberate and you're using a little bit more, using some diversified packages, things like that. So you got to sub and do all those things. So here's where that elite level of offensive production gets killed. Right off the bat, it's the turnover margin, -8. And early in the season, we kind of pointed to, and we're like, well, this negative turnover margin isn't so much on the offense, it's more so on the defense's lack of taking the ball away. There was one point in the season where I even looked at it and I was like, man, this Commanders offense among other teams that have the amount of giveaways the Commanders offense has so far, they're the only team that has a negative turnover margin, which shows that the offense was protecting the ball, but the defense just wasn't taking away. Well, now the Washington Commanders offense is also up there. I think they're bottom 5 in the league in giveaways, meaning they're giving away the ball among the most in the NFL. And then the takeaways aren't coming as you want them to either. So a -8 turnover differential. And look, some of those offensive giveaways are coming from those late game scenarios where a quarterback's got to force the ball, but some of them are also coming from degraded decision making. That overtime interception by Marcus Mariota obviously comes to mind against the Miami Dolphins just this last week. So when you look at 2024 versus 2025 in this category, 2024, the team protected the ball, maintained a positive margin. I think they were +1 by the end of the season. Not great, right? But protecting the football, allowing your defense the opportunity to try to find those opportunities to get takeaways. In 2025, this offense has better yardage production, which again goes back to our between the 20s or between the 10s, our open 80 elite offense type of analysis, but they're gifting opponents nearly an extra possession per game so far this season, which again, just another reason that the season has not gone the way that you needed to. And you just look at week 11 as a microcosm of what's been going on this season in Madrid. The offense was incredibly efficient for 60 minutes, right? In regulation, that overtime interception, very first play of the overtime period, though, however, absolutely just bad decision-making, bad ball placement, just completely killed everything that they did positively, because overall, like I probably gave Marcus Mariota like a B grade from that game. I didn't really grade the game specifically, but just like looking back on it, you probably look at Marcus Mariota, you're like, this is probably like a B performance as a quarterback, but then you just have that killer interception that really kills it. First 10 weeks of the season, the Washington Commanders number 2 in the NFL in red zone efficiency, number 1 in goal to go. Coming into last weekend, 92.3% of goal to go scenarios turned into touchdowns for the Washington Commanders. In week 11, the bottom completely fell out of that. A goose egg inside the red zone, absolutely just completely fell apart in an area that was supposed to be really part of the biggest reason for them having any type of success. So that Madrid loss, again, we're looking back at the entire season, but that Madrid loss really just kind of another nail in the coffin of like when things can go wrong with this team in 2025, they're going to go wrong. Certainly some conservative play calling at the end there as well. Did not necessarily agree with Cliff Kingsbury and Dan Quinn opting to let the clock run down at the end of regulation, take a long field goal, let the clock run down at the end of the half, take a long field goal, things like that. Certainly wanted to see them be more aggressive. Even if you're going to go for the field goal, get a better field goal opportunity for Matt Gay. Look, Matt still has to make those kicks. He didn't, which is why he's no longer with the team. But I still thought that the offense should have been more aggressive. I thought the coaching should have been more aggressive to try to get in a better position. Then, of course, penalties, right? We're going to talk about all of these things, of course, moving up. False starts, holding, continue to be the 2 Achilles heels for this Washington Commanders offense, trying to do anything, erasing all of their biggest momentum whenever they do tend to get it. But that's just the offensive side of the ball. On the defense, what started off as a bend, don't break defense really is kind of shattered because the defensive edges have all but eroded since the first probably quarter of the NFL season. We're going to cover all of that coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're going to do that thanks to our friends over at Prize Picks. Today's episode is brought to you in part by Prize Picks. You and I, we make decisions every single day, every single week of our lives. But on Prize Picks, those decisions can turn into real money, in real time. Don't miss any of the excitement of this sports season, whether you're following along with the NFL, the NBA, or both. There is no better time than now to jump in on the action. And if you haven't tried it yet, Prize Picks is the simplest way to play. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player stats. And if you get them right, you win. It takes less than 60 seconds to make a lineup, and you can play anywhere Prize Picks operates, including California, Texas, and Georgia. I like picking some of my favorite players that we all kind of have on our bucket list to go see, like Patrick Mahomes, guys like that. Of course, I like using Washington Commanders players when I can as well. And the new stacks feature is a game changer. So now you can go with, say, Steph Curry in the NBA. You can go with his points, you can go with his threes, and you can go with his assists all in the same lineup. So go to download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup on Prize Picks. It's good to be right. Thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or review today. And to the everydayers, those of you come through for every single episode, a special thank you goes out to you for coming through for yet another episode. We just talked about the offense, and certainly they have their role to play here and some of the inconsistencies, and where you look at like this stat group, you're like, man, they're really good here. So that should usually lead to success, and why it's not. We also got to talk about the defense, right? So the defense started off this season, bend, don't break. That was the philosophy. That was the way they were executing. And it all but shattered because the defensive edges have completely eroded away, returning the unit to 2024 levels of futility in the run defense, while also exposing even worse pass defense this year than they had in 2025 or 2024. And ultimately, it's just led to a much worse unit overall this season. So the turnstiles going on the edges. The Washington Commanders run defense right now is 27th in the NFL, allowing nearly 140 yards rushing per game, which matches pretty much what the Washington Commanders running offense is doing. So it's essentially negating your biggest strength on offense with your biggest weakness on defense. Now, the specific vulnerability here is on the is not in the interior, because off a right guard, 2.66 yards per carry. Teams are not running at Daron Payne. And I know he wasn't available against the Miami Dolphins, but just looking at the totality of the season, teams have really stopped trying to target that interior part of the defensive line. Javon Kinlaw is a part of that. Johnny Newton, Eddie Goldman. The interior defensive line from a run defense standpoint has done really, really well. And we've heard defensive coordinator Joey Jr. talk about that multiple times this season. But once the injury came to Dietrich Wise Jr., once the injury came to Dorrance Armstrong, not that Dorrance Armstrong was ever a really, truly elite edge setter, but he was certainly better than what's going on right now. Once those two guys got injured, especially started with the injury to Dietrich Wise Jr., those edges just kind of started to fall away. And right now, through 11 games, opponents are averaging 7.26 yards per carry off of the right end. So that's to the defense's left side where Dorrance Armstrong would normally be. And on the left end, where Dietrich Wise would normally be, averaging 6.44 yards per carry. So think about that. 7.26 yards running to the offensive right side. So the Commanders' defense left side. 6.44 yards running to the offensive left side, Commanders' defensive right side. And only 2.66 yards up the middle. So if you're an offensive coordinator and you see that information and you see that on tape, where are you going to run the ball? Where are you going to go? That's exactly what's been happening this season, and that's what was happening last season, honestly. And that's something that you wanted to see the Washington Commanders attack and kind of go out there and get better at. Now, again, they did make strides. They did make moves to go and try to do that. Jacob Martin is a player that we talked about as a rotational defensive player. Better is probably about as good of a pass rusher as Dante Fowler Jr. was last year, but a better run defender. Not a great run defender, but a better run defender than Dante Fowler. But he was never intended to come out here and be a starting every down edge defender the way that like a Dietrich Wise Jr. is. So you see those impacts of those injuries really kind of taking hold here. And it's just proven the failure of the defensive ends. The linebackers are not able to set the edge. I mean, Frankie Lou's never been an edge setter. Bobby Wagner is not an edge setter. Jordan McGee, I think, is shown some potential there, but he's not all the way there yet. And it just kind of has been, I should say, the Achilles heel for this defense, because it's also forcing the box players and it's forcing those safeties to try to stay close to the line of scrimmage, keep creating some openings in the secondary. So looking at last year versus this year, in 2024, really not a lot different. The run defense was ranked 30th. A little bit of false hope here this year, weeks 1 through 5 in 2025. The unit was doing a lot better until it regressed, now allowing 4.71 yards per carry on the season. In recent weeks, that number has actually climbed to over 5.5 yards per carry. So clearly that fix was temporary, mainly because, again, like I said, of the injuries. At least last year, you know, it's not much of a silver lining at this point because the results are what they are. But last year, this unit was giving up similar type of run averages to the left, right, and even up the middle at times. But they were doing it with all their players healthy, right? Like they didn't have the injury situation that they had last year. So it's a little bit frustrating, I'm sure, from a team building perspective for Adam Peters, but also obviously watching the games as a fan or as a media member, frustrating to see just no edge, right? And then, like I said in previous episodes, it's something that I've just kind of started becoming accustomed to saying in the press boxes when a team runs to the edge, just the words coming out of my mouth, just no edge. You know what I mean? There's just no edge setting right now. So certainly in the offseason, you know, when we get there, I was asked a question in our last mailbag episode of where I would focus. You know, I know a lot of mock drafts have the Washington Commanders taking a receiver in the first round, and, you know, who's available and all that stuff is certainly going to make a difference. But I've said, you know, I think that where the Washington Commanders team needs to really focus this offseason is getting better in the trenches, specifically on the edges. And if they move on from Deron Payne, you have to replace that, because for all the things that Deron Payne is not, he has still been a very, very solid defender in the interior this year. So if you get rid of Deron Payne for the things that he's not, you still have to be able to at least replace what he is and then try to get better from there as well. So the pass rush began the season pretty well. Again, for a little while there, they were like top half of the league, top 12, top 10 in sacks per pass attempt. And then eventually that just fell away. Once Dorrance Armstrong Jr. got injured for the season, was lost for the year, that really plummeted. They now currently rank 25th in sack rate, 7.62%. Weeks 9 and 10, their pressure rate completely disappeared. 0 sacks in those 2 games combined, allowing the quarterbacks to kind of just sit back and do what they needed to do. And the results showed up on the scoreboard, obviously. And then last week against Miami Dolphins, 3 sacks in week 11, at least helped kind of keep the team in there, had a late lead, all those things. The short right zone, so this is the offense's right side, so the defense's left side. That's where you most often find Frankie Louvu. It's where you most often find, Jeremy Reeves or Darnell Savage or Trey Amos or Mikey Sainer still in the slot. That area of the field has been the area that's got picked apart the most. 118 passes have targeted that side of the field, 74% completion rates when the Washington Commanders' left side of their defense is targeted by opposing quarterbacks. So opposing quarterbacks, quite simply, just know that they can roll to their right, they can fire quickly to the right, they can do whatever they want against that left side coverage, and they're almost guaranteed to have yardage. And some of that is from that zone play, some of that's from the youth, some of that's from the inexperience, some of that's from what we talked about. Like, we've seen players play and impress, but then for whatever reason, they don't really contact the receiver at the line of scrimmage, trying to throw off the timing, throw off the release, things like that. And that certainly seems to be a trend enough that you think that's a little bit in the coaching of how they play press, which is a little bit confusing, because press man coverage in its own very nature, I mean, literally the word press is in there. Press is a verb. It's an action. Like, you do something to something, you interact with another player to press things like that. Like, I wouldn't tell you to press a button and you don't touch it, right? You got to touch something to press it. So the fact that we see so many times this Washington Commanders secondary playing in that press coverage position without actually impacting the receiver coming off the line of scrimmage is a little bit confusing, and certainly contributes to, again, like I said, the Washington Commanders left side defense giving up the most passing yardage, the most highly successful passing part of attacking their defense to the offense's right side of the field. So continue to expect that for the rest of the season. The Washington Commanders opponents are going to run left, they're going to run right, and they're going to pass right more often than they pass anywhere else moving forward. Coming up, we're going to take a look back at the season. We're going to look at some stock up, some stock down. There's at least one specific player that I've got stock going up that I know at least some of you, especially the more vocal parts of you, are not going to agree with. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you in part by Game Time. The NFL season is rolling forward. And honestly, even in a bad season, there is nothing better than being in a stadium surrounded by fans, cheering on the team, coming in hopeful, trying to help your team get to a win. I'll tell you what, man, that Madrid press box in historic Bernabeu Stadium was open air, right? It was an open air stadium. Fans were literally sitting right in front of us in the press box. It was really cool, like to the point where when y'all stood up for a big play or something, you were actually blocking our view a little bit. But you know what? It was like, man, we can't ask for a better environment. So there's nothing better. So even when your team is losing, you guys really show up for the Washington Commanders. And I got to tell you, you've earned a lot of respect as a fan base from me because of it. And that's why you need to use Game Time to get to those games. It makes it fast. It makes it easy. And you get the Game Time guarantee so that you know you're getting the best price on 100% authentic tickets to every game. Whenever I go to a game as a fan this weekend, I'm hoping to be healthy enough to go see my Buckeyes face off against the Rutgers on Saturday. I use Game Time to get tickets for events like that one. So download the Game Time app, create your account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. There are some individually brilliant performances going on this season from individuals. Like I said, individually brilliant, right? That's quite simply the team's performance overall is just kind of masking. And it's also being hampered by systemic discipline problems, special teams, up and down play. all those kind of stuff. So I want to go through just a little bit of stock up, stock down. And, look, I'm going to get my first stock up out of the way right now. Bobby Wagner. Look, Bobby Wagner to me is still the most valuable player on this defense. 8 tackles in week 11, a key 4th and 1 goal line stand. When the scheme is working correctly, when players are doing their job in their position, you see this whole thing is put together. And Bobby Wagner is absolutely a critical part of that. I think Dan Quinn obviously had a really big part of it as well, putting the right plays in place at the right times. And you kind of see that stuff come together. Like, listen, don't think that the Miami Dolphins didn't try to get Devon Achane isolated on Bobby Wagner, things like that, things we've seen other teams do. The difference is Dan Quinn did a better job of anticipating it, a better job of putting in a call that prevented it from happening. Bobby Wagner made the right checks, made the right calls in line with it, and it resulted in a much better defensive performance. Now, I think the Denver Broncos defense, a little bit more ability just overall. Like, they don't have a Jalen Waddle, but they certainly have good players that I think in Congress, like as a group, are a better total offense than the Miami Dolphins. So we'll see if that continues to work out that way. But Bobby Wagner, I do have as a stock up player. Running back Chris Rodriguez Jr., I think this is one that everybody's going to agree on. Look, to me, he is officially the best running back in this running back group, and he's the most consistent running back in this group. Averaged 5.3 yards per carry in week 11, scored touchdowns in week 9 and 10, brings physicality and really helps this team dominate in that middle 80 period or area of the field. And Chris Rodriguez is a person that if you've been on Everyday or Locked On Commanders for a while now, Chris Rodriguez is a guy that this show has believed in, this show has supported, this show has thought needed to get more and more burn as the years have gone on. He's getting it this year now, maybe a little bit too late to be honest with you, but Chris Rodriguez is making the most of those opportunities. Couldn't be more proud of the young fellow doing that. So some stock down, Matt Gay. We don't need to spend too much time on this, but I did want to at least talk about Matt Gay, obviously missing 2 critical field goals in that game. I know they're longer, and yes, I don't think that Cliff Kingsbury, Dan Quinn should have forced him into those long field goals. I think you need to be a little bit more aggressive, trying to get yards, get the ball closer. But at the end of the day, when you're called upon, you need to go out there and make those kicks, especially when you're Matt Gay and you're a guy that the team brought in specifically for that leg. You have to be able to convert those opportunities. He didn't, which is why he's out, and Jake Moody is now in as the kicker for the Washington Commanders. We'll see. He's been a little bit up and down in his career as well, so we'll see what he can produce. Discipline is obviously a downward trend. The team started the year with a massive penalty yardage advantage. They were actually up 90 yards on opponents, but now they are down, or now that advantage is down to just 5 yards. So that shows you just how much the penalties have gotten worse. False starts, there are 21 of them this season. Offensive holding penalties, 17 of them this season. Those are the primary killers. Your biggest penalty getter so far this year has been Josh Connolly Jr., which as a rookie offensive tackle, I'm almost kind of forgive a little bit, but guys like Zach Ertz and those other guys, the veterans, have been culprits of it themselves as well. Pre-snap technique errors, they kill drives, man, and this offense can't afford it. Marcus Mariota, I think, has done a pretty solid job. I don't really have a stock up or a stock down on him. I think Marcus Mariota has proven he's a veteran backup for a reason. And I think the bottom line with Marcus Mariota, because on the last episode, we had this conversation, should Jaden come back? Should Jaden not come back? If you're on the side of Jaden not coming back, I think what you have to understand with Marcus Mariota is he's a floor raiser, not a ceiling raiser, right? Like Jaden Daniels raises the ceiling of this offense. I think with Marcus Mariota, the ceiling is where it is, but it's not going to be as bad. It's not like some of the other backups you have in the league. And unfortunately, sometimes his decision-making is going to be a little bit suspect as he tries to make plays, just like he did in that overtime interception. So that's going to do it for this bye-week look back at the 2025 season so far. We've got 6 more games left to go. Playoffs are not mathematically impossible, but more or less not going to happen. So we'll do another look back at the season as a whole when we get to the end of this thing here in about 6 or 7 weeks. Next time on Locked On Commanders, we'll continue to break down this team from a bye-week perspective. I'm looking to grade some rookies, grade some free agents, doing things like that. I am traveling to Ohio, and we are entering the weekend, so bear with me, a little bit of flexibility and patience as I work on getting the next episode out to you. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, you can text me directly by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Become an insider, contribute to the mailbag episodes, also get inside information and direct communication with me outside of the episodes. For your second listen of the day, check out the Locked On NFL podcast twice per day. You get the national narratives across the league, including Washington, on Locked On NFL twice per day on YouTube or wherever you're listening to today's episode. Until next time, everybody out there, please be safe. Please be kind to one another. We'll talk again real soon. Every day, I see you every day. I appreciate you every day. And I thank you for coming through for today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.